It was the last warm weekend of September 1997, the kind of Saturday that the Nebraska plains hold on to like a last gift before winter closes in. The cottonwoods along the creek had started to go yellow at the tips, and the air had that particular smell, cut alfalfa and turned earth and something cooler underneath, that people who grew up in Cass County knew meant the season was turning. In the town of Weeping Water, population just under 1,000, the Alderman family had gathered the way they always did on long weekends. Front porch, folding chairs, the screen door swinging open and shut as people moved between the kitchen and the yard. Joanna Alderman was 26 that fall. She was the middle daughter, the one everyone in the family described the same way without consulting each other, the one who made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. She taught third grade at the elementary school on Depot Street. She coached the girls' softball team in spring. She had a black lab named Scout, and a reliable old pickup and plans. Real specific plans. To spend the following summer abroad, the trip she'd been putting a little money aside for since she graduated college. She hugged her mother goodbye at the end of that afternoon. She said she'd call when she got home. She never called. Her sister found her the following morning. And what happened inside that house on Elm Creek Road would remain officially unsolved for 26 years. Not because the evidence wasn't there, but because the man who killed Joanna Alderman was the last person anyone in that family would ever have looked at. He was sitting on the porch with them that Saturday. He helped look for her on Sunday. He cried at her funeral. And then, 3 years later, he married her sister. To understand how that was possible, how a family loved a man who had done what he did, you first have to understand who Joanna Alderman was and what her world looked like before he destroyed it. Weeping Water sits in the southeastern corner of Nebraska, about 40 miles south of Omaha, in the kind of landscape that asks something of you. It is flat and wide, and the sky dominates everything. And the people who stay in places like that tend to be people who find something steady in the openness, rather than something empty. The Aldermans had been in Cass County for 3 generations. Joanna's grandfather had farmed a section of land outside of town. Her father, Gerald, ran a small equipment repair business out of a shop behind the house on 4th Street. Her mother, Rosemary, worked the front counter at the county extension office and knew, it seemed, every family in a 30-mile radius by name. There were 3 daughters. Paula was the oldest, 30 that fall, already married with a daughter of her own. Joanna was the middle. And then there was Darcy, 23, the youngest, studying to be a dental hygienist at a community college in Plattsmouth, working weekend shifts at a restaurant in Omaha to cover the gap. The Aldermans were not a family that needed a reason to gather. They gathered because that was what they did. The Saturday dinners, the porch evenings that went until dark, the habit of driving out to see each other on no occasion in particular. These were not performances of closeness. They were just how the family was built. Joanna lived in a rental house on Elm Creek Road, about 4 miles outside of town. It was a modest place, 2 bedrooms, a covered front porch, a yard big enough for Scout to run in. She'd made it her own the way young teachers make things their own. Second-hand furniture she'd painted herself. A bookshelf that took up most of one living room wall, photographs of her students tacked above her desk. She drove to school each morning in the dark during winter months and thought nothing of it. This was her life. She had built it herself, and she was proud of it. She also loved September. She'd said it every year, her mother would later recall, that September was the month everything felt possible. Right before the cold came in and made the world go small. She told her mother that on the porch that afternoon, the last Saturday of the month. She said, "Everything feels possible right now." Rosemary Alderman would repeat that sentence for the rest of her life. That evening, Joanna drove home alone. It was just past 7. The cottonwoods were gold in the last of the light, and the road out to Elm Creek was empty the way country roads are empty at dusk, and nobody watched her turn into the gravel drive. By midnight, something had gone terribly wrong inside that house. At 8:14 the following morning, Darcy Alderman pulled into her sister's driveway. Joanna was supposed to have met her for breakfast in Plattsmouth at 8 o'clock. She wasn't answering her phone. The answering machine picked up on the first ring, which meant the line was in use or the handset had been left off the hook. Darcy knocked. Then she tried the door. It was unlocked. She found Joanna in the kitchen. She did not go further into the house. She ran to her car and drove to the nearest neighbor's property and knocked until someone answered and asked to use the phone. Her own pager was going off while she drove. She didn't look at it. Cass County Sheriff's deputies arrived at 8:41 a.m. The State Patrol Crime Lab was on scene by 11. Investigators documented what appeared to be evidence of a physical confrontation in the kitchen. Joanna had been killed. The cause, established by the medical examiner, was blunt force trauma. There were no signs of forced entry. The front door had been unlocked. Scout was found in the backyard, unharmed, which suggested the dog had been outside when it happened, or had been put outside. That detail, the dog outside, would be mentioned in the case file 3 separate times in the months that followed. It was the kind of detail that points towards someone who knew the household, someone who knew the dog. Investigators also noted something on the kitchen counter: 2 coffee cups. Both had been used. The second cup had been rinsed but not washed, and it was sitting in the dish rack upside down. Someone had been in that kitchen with Joanna Alderman the night before. Someone had drunk coffee with her and then cleaned up after themselves before they left. That second cup, set in the rack like a guest who'd been taught good manners. Cass County Sheriff's investigator Dale Pruitt, 41 years old and 15 years into the job, took the case as lead. He would later describe the first 72 hours as organized and thorough and completely unrewarding. The community was in shock. Weeping Water is the kind of town where violent crime feels like something that happens elsewhere, to other people in cities. People came forward immediately, wanting to help, wanting to give information. And Pruitt took all of it. He took it and sorted it, and followed every thread. None of the threads led anywhere that held. There was an ex-boyfriend, briefly, a man named Kevin Haas, who had dated Joanna during her first year of teaching and had reportedly not taken the breakup well. Investigators interviewed him twice. He had an alibi for Saturday evening, confirmed by 3 separate witnesses at a bar in Nebraska City 40 miles away. He was eliminated. There was a parent of a student, a man who had come to the school twice to complain about a grade Joanna had given his son and had been described by the principal as agitated. He was interviewed. He accounted for his time. He was eliminated. The second coffee cup was tested. The DINA extracted from the rim was not from Kevin Haas. It was not from the parent. It did not match anyone in the criminal database. It sat in the state lab file, labeled and waiting, with a profile that matched no one they had ever asked to look at. By February 1998, the active investigation had stalled. By summer, the file was still open, but the urgency had shifted to other things the way urgency always does. Dale Pruitt kept a copy of his notes at home. He read them sometimes when he couldn't sleep. He always came back to the coffee cup. The family buried Joanna in the Weeping Water Cemetery on a cold October day, in ground that had just started to harden. Gerald Alderman did not speak at the service. Rosemary did. She spoke about September and about what her daughter had said on the porch and about how she intended to hold on to that. Among those who stood at the graveside and wept that day was a young man named Marcus Teller. He had been Darcy's boyfriend for about a year. He had met the Alderman family at a 4th of July gathering in 1996 and had been welcomed the way the family welcomed people who loved their own, warmly, completely, without reservation. He helped carry the folding chairs back to the car after the service. He held Darcy's hand. He said to Rosemary that Joanna had been one of the finest people he'd ever known. Rosemary thanked him. She meant it. He seemed like such a good young man. The years that follow a murder in a small community have a particular weight. They are not years of forgetting. Small towns don't forget, but they are years of continuing, which sometimes looks from the outside like the same thing. The equipment shop on 4th Street kept running. The school on Depot Street kept teaching 3rd grade, in the same room where Joanna had taught, with her name on a plaque outside the door that a parent had donated in the 2nd year. Scout lived out his years with Gerald and Rosemary and died in 2003, and Gerald buried him in the backyard and didn't talk about it for a week. By 2000, Darcy and Marcus Teller were engaged. The family held a dinner. There were photographs taken on that same front porch where Joanna had always sat. Marcus was in several of them, arm around Darcy, smiling in that easy way he had. They married in June 2001 at the Methodist Church in Weeping Water. Gerald walked Darcy down the aisle. Rosemary cried. Marcus's family came from Omaha. It was a good day, people said afterward. Joanna would have been happy for her sister. Marcus Teller became part of the Alderman family in the most formal sense. He came to the Sunday gatherings. He sat in the folding chairs on the porch. He remembered Joanna at the right moments and said nothing about her at the wrong ones. He was, by every measure that a family uses to judge a man who is married into them, exactly what he appeared to be. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every anniversary of Joanna's death, when the family gathered quietly and put flowers on the grave, Marcus was there. Sometimes he placed the flowers himself. Dale Pruitt retired from the Cass County Sheriff's Office in 2009. He did not take the Alderman file with him. That file was institutional property. But he had his notes. He still read them. The Dina profile in the state lab was still unmatched. Every year or two he'd make a quiet call to see if anything had changed in the databases. Nothing had changed. Every case on this channel represents exactly this kind of work. Years of following threads that seem to go cold. Because some threads eventually lead somewhere. If that matters to you, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get back to the Alderman family. Because in 2023, something finally changed. It started not with a new lead, but with a new tool. The Nebraska State Patrol Crime Lab, as part of a systematic review of unresolved violent crime cases with biological evidence, submitted the Dina profile from the Alderman case to an investigative genealogy service, the same technique that had cracked the Golden State Killer case and dozens of others. A process by which crime scene Dina is compared to profiles voluntarily uploaded to public ancestry databases, and distant family matches are used to triangulate back toward an unknown contributor. The analyst assigned to the Alderman profile was a woman named Constance Ryba, who had been doing genealogy work for cold cases for 4 years. She uploaded the profile on a Thursday afternoon and went home for the weekend. When she came back Monday morning, there were 3 distant matches waiting. Cousins, second cousins, the outer edges of 2 overlapping family trees. She began to build inward. It took 11 weeks. On a morning in late November 2023, Constance Ryba sent her findings to the Nebraska State Patrol. The DNA left on that rinsed coffee cup in Joanna Alderman's dish rack, preserved for 26 years in a state lab evidence bag, belonged to a man named Marcus Allen Teller. The investigator who received the report read it twice. Then she pulled the family tree the genealogy report had reconstructed, tracing who Marcus Teller was, who he had married, what family he had married into. She sat very still for a moment. Then she made a phone call to Cass County. Marcus Teller was 53 years old and still living in Weeping Water when investigators came for him. He had worked for 20 years in agricultural equipment sales, the same industry as Gerald Alderman, who had given him his first referral and had been proud to do it. He coached his son's Little League team. He served on the board of the Methodist Church. He was, by every outward measure, a good neighbor, a steady provider, and a devoted husband. He and Darcy had been married for 22 years. Investigators had spent 3 weeks preparing before they made contact, verifying the genealogy findings with a direct DNA sample obtained covertly through a discarded item, confirming the match at a level that removed any reasonable doubt. They built their approach carefully, because the arrest of Marcus Teller was not just the arrest of a murder suspect. It was the dismantling of a story that an entire family had been living inside of for over 2 decades. When they came to the house on the morning of December 14, 2023, Darcy answered the door. She looked at the investigators and then looked past them at the cars in the driveway. She said, "What happened?" Marcus came up behind her from the hallway. He saw the investigators' faces. He did not run. He did not speak. He stood there for a moment with his hand on his wife's shoulder, a gesture so practiced and so ordinary that the investigators would describe it later as the thing they could not shake from the memory of that morning. He was arrested on charges of first-degree murder in the death of Joanna May Alderman. Darcy Alderman Teller sat down on the floor of her front hallway and did not get up for a very long time. The case that prosecutors assembled over the following months established what investigators had long suspected about the nature of the crime. Marcus Teller had known Joanna Alderman before he began dating Darcy. They had been acquainted through a mutual connection, and the relationship had been more complicated than the family ever knew. On the night of September 27, 1997, he had driven to Elm Creek Road and been let inside, welcomed, given coffee, treated as someone trusted. He had put Scout in the backyard. He had killed Joanna Alderman and washed his cup and left. He had then, over the following year, constructed himself into a figure of comfort for the family he had devastated. He had chosen Darcy. He had chosen proximity to his own crime. A jailhouse phone call recorded in February 2024 captured Marcus Teller speaking with a former colleague. He did not confess in any language that a prosecutor would call clean. But he said this: "I was always right there. The whole time. Nobody ever looked." He was right. Nobody had looked. He was convicted of first-degree murder in September 2024 and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Rosemary Alderman was 78 years old when the verdict came in. She had been present every day of the trial. She sat in the second row, behind the prosecution table, the same row where she had sat through the burial service for her daughter 27 years before. She did not look at Marcus Teller when they read the verdict. She looked at the wall above the judge's bench. When a reporter asked her afterward what she felt, she said she felt like she could finally tell Joanna that someone had answered for it. That was the word she used: answered. Not paid for. Not made right. Answered Darcy Alderman Teller filed for divorce before the trial concluded. She has not spoken publicly about what these years have meant or cost her, and that privacy is hers entirely. What is known is that she was present at the cemetery in Weeping Water in October 2024, on the 27th anniversary of her sister's death, and that she placed flowers on the grave, and that she stood there for a long time in the cold Nebraska morning before she walked back to her car. What Marcus Teller took from this family was not only Joanna. He took 26 years of mourning Joanna while standing next to the person who had killed her. He took the Sunday dinners and the porch evenings and the folding chairs and the photographs where he stood smiling, all of it contaminated now, all of it requiring a kind of revision that the mind resists and the heart never fully completes. The Aldermans had loved him. They had trusted him with their grief. And he had held that trust in his hands and done nothing with it except use it to stay safe. A coffee cup in a dish rack. 26 years. A genealogy analyst who came back from a weekend and opened her Monday morning email. Truth has a kind of patience that the people who think they've escaped it always underestimate. Joanna Alderman was 26 years old. She put her money aside for a trip she never got to take. She told her mother on a September afternoon that everything felt possible. She was right, and she should have gotten to find out how right she was, on her own terms, in her own time. What does it say about the nature of guilt that a man can carry it for 26 years and never once stay away from the family he wronged? That he came back, year after year, and stood at the grave. We ask you to sit with that. And we ask you this, when you think about the investigators who built that genealogy trace, the analyst who came in on a Monday morning, and Dale Pruitt reading his notes in the dark long after he retired, what does that kind of persistence mean to you? What do we owe the people who refuse to let a name become just a cold case number? Leave your thoughts below. This community always has something worth reading in the comments. Justice found Joanna Alderman after 26 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe that truth eventually finds its way, no matter how long someone thinks they've outrun it, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More solved cold cases are in the description below. Thank you for being here.